Greetings, my dear viewer. This is a channel about marital infidelity and about the consequences if one spouse starts to cheat on the other. If you, as well as I do, support true family values and condemn cheating, then subscribe to the channel and give this video a like. Let's get started. I had definitely had more drinks than I should have, but she didn't seem to mind when I slipped into the seat beside her. My thoughts were a tangled mess, trying and failing to make sense of it all. Tyler. How could someone be so unyielding, so unwilling to see reason, to forgive his wife over something so trivial? "What are you even ranting about?" he asked, his expression blank. "It wasn't that big of a deal," I argued. "For God's sake, it was one mistake. If he truly loved her, he wouldn't throw everything away over something so small." Tyler snorted. "Small? She cheated. A woman who betrays her husband deserves the consequences. There's no way to justify that. That's a brutal way to see it. A woman who does that has made it clear she doesn't respect him. If she cared, it wouldn't have happened. Whether or not he outwardly shows it, it changes everything. She already decided he wasn't enough. But what if that wasn't what it meant to her?" "It doesn't matter what it meant to her," he said without hesitation. "What matters is what she did, and that can't be undone." That's such an archaic mindset. You sound like you belong in another century. Couples can work through plenty of issues, but there's no excuse for violence. That only applies if she confesses first. If he has to find out on his own, she's finished. And if she tries to lie after getting caught, she might as well be burned at the stake. Most men don't scrutinize their wives, which is why so many never get caught. "This whole conversation is pointless," I muttered, exasperated. "I'm going to bed. I'll be there soon." Mallory and I had spent most of the day scouring flea markets and garage sales. I never minded tagging along. While she sifted through boxes, I always found something to keep me occupied. She had an odd fascination with antique ceramic coasters. The uglier, the better. We were saving every spare penny for our first home, one with a spacious kitchen where she could line the walls with at least 100 of those tiles. We'd been married for 6 years, together even longer. Mallory was petite, with a softness to her figure that I always teased her about. Her nursery figure, I called it. We planned to have a few kids once we got the house. For now, every dollar went toward that dream, scraping together enough for an 80% down payment. I was halfway through a magazine article when my thoughts drifted back to our earlier discussion. Something about Mallory's reaction had stuck with me. She had been defensive, more than I had expected. Infidelity had never been a topic between us, and I had never considered it an issue. But now, my curiosity was piqued. The guys I worked with kept a close watch on their wives. Mallory had always been fiercely independent. I trusted her implicitly, never questioned her loyalty, never felt the urge to stray myself. I had assumed she felt the same. Still, a little curiosity couldn't hurt. I didn't expect to find anything, but I had to check. Our work schedules didn't align perfectly. I worked from 6 to 4, Mallory from 8 to 6. That left a window of opportunity. The next morning, instead of heading straight to work, I made a detour back home around 9. I wasn't sure what I was searching for, but it felt like a game, a scavenger hunt for hidden truths, until I caught the scent. Air freshener, a strong, overwhelming amount. I followed the trail through the house, moving like a bloodhound. It led to the fireplace. The floor had been recently swept, the soot on the bricks still damp. Mallory had burned something, then tried to mask the evidence with air freshener. If she had destroyed something, there had to be remnants. If she were thorough, she would have disposed of them elsewhere. But she hadn't. In the garage, I found what I was looking for, an old cardboard box holding the liner from our wastebasket. Spreading newspaper over the kitchen table, I emptied its contents. Mostly ash, but among the charred remains were tiny, unburnt scraps of paper and fragments of photographs. I couldn't make out anything conclusive. But one fact was undeniable. She had felt the need to erase something. Letters, pictures, whatever they were, she hadn't wanted me to see them. And after our conversation the night before, that unsettled me. Mallory was my entire world, the center of the future we were building. Now I realized there were parts of her life I knew nothing about. Her job, her colleagues. I had never questioned it before, but now I had to. On my way to work, I took a detour to Radio Shack, picking up 3 voice-activated digital recorders along with extra batteries. Then I stopped by our phone carrier's store, fabricating a story about an NSA audit to request call logs for both our phones from the past 3 months. After reviewing my own, I shredded the document at work. For the first time in our marriage, doubt crept in. I despised the feeling, but I couldn't ignore it. That evening, I got home before Mallory and discreetly placed the recorders, one in the living room, another in our bedroom, and the last in the kitchen, positioned to avoid interference from the refrigerator's hum. Each morning before leaving, I switched them on. By the time she arrived, dinner was already on the table. "Hey, sweetheart. Hope chili's okay. As long as it's not too spicy." Halfway through our meal, I eased into it. By the way, the house smelled strange when I got in, like burnt plastic and something else. "What did you burn in the fireplace this morning?" She hesitated for a fraction of a second before answering. "Oh, just some old school papers." "Why not just throw them away? Or shred them? Why does it matter? The way you cleaned up afterward, it looked like you were covering a crime scene." "I don't know, I just did. Why are you making this into a big deal?" "Mallory, they didn't look like school papers. They looked like letters and pictures." Her expression darkened. "Did you seriously dig through the trash just to accuse me of something?" "Yes." "Go to hell, asshole. You can sleep on the couch." She stormed off to take a shower. I had never seen her react like that before. Then again, I had never confronted her like this. The doorbell rang. While she was distracted, I seized the opportunity to grab her phone, copying every contact, outgoing call, incoming call, and message. It only took a few minutes to transfer everything to my computer. The next day, I took an unexpected day off. Before leaving the house, I activated the recorders and walked out as if heading to work. Instead, I wasted time at a nearby diner before returning home around 8. Mallory had made exactly one phone call. Things at home weren't exactly falling apart, but something was undeniably off. There were no outright fights or dramatic confrontations, just an unsettling shift in the air. He was becoming increasingly wary, though he couldn't quite pinpoint the reason. The weight of his silent suspicions was beginning to wear on me. Fine, I could handle this. Friday seemed like the right time to take action. I just needed to piece things together first. The voice on the other end of the phone was unfamiliar, but I had no doubt that with a little effort, I'd figure out who it belonged to. The bigger mystery was what, exactly, was supposed to happen on Friday. That question nagged at me as I spent the morning at the library, poring over her phone records. I could have done this from home, but the library's reverse phone directory was faster and more comprehensive than anything I could find online. Unfortunately, it wasn't much help when it came to cell phones. Most of the numbers I came across were predictable, either stored contacts or ones I recognized. But one stood out, a frequently dialed number listed as TR. It wasn't just saved in her contacts, it was on speed dial. When I ran a check, I found the number was registered to Daniel Whitman. He worked alongside Mallory at GenX. I'd met him a handful of times. The last time had been about 10 days prior at a corporate event. That night, Mallory and Daniel had been practically inseparable. Seeing them together had left a bitter taste in my mouth. His wife, a petite brunette, had seemed just as uneasy as I was. I compiled a list of every call exchanged between them over the past 3 months. Strangely, there were no text messages, an omission that only heightened my suspicion. I was fairly certain she had spoken to Daniel that morning, though there were too many calls to be sure. Armed with my newly acquired call logs, I decided to take a bold step. I drove straight to Daniel Whitman's house and knocked on the door, unsure of what I was hoping to accomplish, but knowing I had nothing to lose. The woman who answered was unexpected. "Well, this is interesting," she said, arms folded. "I'm in a bit of a predicament here." "I know you're Daniel's wife," I replied. "I don't think we've ever been introduced." She extended her hand. "Kimberly, but most people just call me Kim." I shook her hand out of courtesy, but before I could get another word in, she got straight to the point. "Let's not dance around it, Tyler. Your wife and my husband are having an affair." Her bluntness hit me like a gut punch. I hadn't expected such direct confirmation. Worse still, she clearly knew more than I did. "I've already filed for divorce," she went on, her voice laced with cold resolve. "Mallory is named in the suit, and I have more than enough proof, but I could use your help filling in a few gaps." I exhaled slowly. "Kimberly, I'm not here to cause trouble. Honestly, I just started piecing things together yesterday. All I have are some phone records. Let me see them." She didn't wait for an invitation, already reaching for the papers. After a moment's hesitation, I handed over a copy. She examined them with the sharp focus of an auditor untangling a financial scandal. As she cross-referenced my records with her own notes, her expression shifted to grim satisfaction. Her eagerness unsettled me. "Mind telling me what you just found?" I finally asked. "Of course." She slid 3 motel receipts across the table. "This is what I've collected over the last 2 weeks." Each receipt came from a different motel, all paid for in cash. The dates and times lined up too perfectly to be a coincidence. The evidence was damning. "The fool doesn't realize I check his pockets every night," she said with a smirk. "I take anything suspicious, and he's too oblivious to notice." Her voice hardened, her fury bubbling just beneath the surface. The veins in her neck strained as her hands clenched into fists. I shifted uneasily, wondering if her anger might turn on me simply because I was married to Mallory. "I have more, if you need it," she continued before pausing. "Actually, I have something better." From her purse, she pulled out a zippered plastic bag and placed it in front of me. Inside was a pair of women's underwear. "Do these look familiar?" she asked. My stomach lurched. The gray-green bikini panties were unmistakable. They belonged to a set Mallory had. "I found these in Daniel's coat pocket after the last company party," Kimberly said, her voice razor-sharp. "He tore the house apart looking for them, but never had the nerve to ask me if I'd seen them. You can hold on to them. Just make sure I get them back." For the next hour, she vented her fury with no filter. I tried to excuse myself multiple times, but she wasn't finished. Finally, as her anger subsided, she mentioned needing some rest, which gave me the opportunity to leave. Just as I was about to step out, she delivered one last chilling revelation. Daniel refused to use condoms. That evening, when Mallory came home, dinner was waiting. I had skipped lunch and was starving. She was as composed as ever, and for the first time, I realized why I hadn't caught on earlier. She was an expert at keeping secrets. Over slices of key lime pie and coffee, I decided to confront her. "Mallory, can I ask you something without you getting defensive?" She didn't look up. "Is this about the fireplace again?" "No, something else." "All right, go ahead." I placed the matching bra from her lingerie set on the table. "Where's the bottom that goes with this?" She barely glanced at it. "Probably in my dresser." "Why?" "Can you check?" Now she looked up, her expression darkening. "Why are you going through my underwear? Are you turning into some kind of creep?" I didn't react. "Just check." She hesitated, staring at her untouched dessert. We both knew the truth. She couldn't retrieve something that wasn't there. "Oh, right," she finally muttered. "I threw them out last week. The elastic was shot, and I didn't feel like fixing them." My tone remained steady. "They were brand new. You bought them 3 weeks ago." Her fists clenched, her lip trembled, her throat tightened. She looked ready to explode. "All right, Sherlock," she spat. "Are you going to tell me where my underwear went?" Last week, before we left for your company party, I saw you put them on. I remember because you looked incredible. But when we got home, you changed in the bathroom. And I noticed something. You weren't wearing them anymore. You're mistaken. I had them on when I got home. You just didn't notice. I leaned forward. Then explain how they ended up in Daniel Whitman's coat pocket. I placed the plastic bag on the table. Her face lost its color. Where did you get those? From Daniel's wife. I met her gaze. Why do you think she had them? Mallory shot up from her seat, her voice shaking with fury. You bastard! Stop prying into things that don't concern you. There's nothing going on between me and Daniel. I have no idea how she got my underwear. She crossed her arms, defiant. Got any more insane accusations? There's one more thing, Mallory. My tone was controlled, but beneath it, fury simmered. I put together a little form for you to complete. Just the basics. Dates, places. Every instance you met another man behind my back. To make it easier, I took the pen and filled in the first few details myself. As she watched in silence, I wrote down the name of the motel and the date of her last encounter with Daniel. In the next space, I repeated his name, linking it once more to the same location. Then, I recorded the date again. Finish it, Mallory, I said, sliding the paper toward her. Then we'll talk. She didn't move. Her gaze remained locked on the sheet in front of her, unreadable. Defiance? Shock? I wasn't sure, but my patience was wearing thin. And another thing, I continued, my voice slicing through the quiet. I'm furious with you, but what disgusts me even more is that Daniel didn't bother with protection. Betraying me was one thing, but you didn't even care about the consequences? Were they all this careless? Or was it just him? Her hands curled into fists. Only Daniel. The admission lingered between us. Neither of us had expected her to say it out loud, least of all her. She realized too late what she had just given away. I assumed, she started, then cut herself off, knocking the paper aside before storming out. A moment later, the bedroom door slammed, muffling the sound of her sobs. I grabbed my keys and left. I drove aimlessly, letting the roads blur past, until I found myself parked outside a cheap motel. Sleep wasn't an option. When morning came, I called in sick, saying I needed a few days off. That same morning, I kept my word. Kimberly's underwear, the proof of my own indiscretions, was returned. She accepted them in silence, her expression impossible to read. I didn't wait for a reaction. I didn't offer an explanation. I just walked away. I needed stability, something to anchor me. A weekly rental motel room with a tiny kitchenette would have to do. When I stopped by the house later, Mallory was gone. I used the opportunity to collect whatever I could. Clothes, dishes, silverware, a few pairs of jeans. An hour later, I had everything that now counted as my belongings. As I stepped outside, heading for my car, a familiar figure caught my eye. A few doors down, Daniel Whitman was unloading boxes. I let out a dry, humorless laugh. So, he was in the same situation. Whether Kimberly had thrown him out or he had left willingly didn't really matter. The outcome was the same. Before I could leave, another car pulled into the lot. Mallory. She didn't notice me, probably didn't even recognize my car. Without hesitation, she walked up to Daniel. They exchanged a few words before heading into his room together. I waited 10 minutes, more than enough time for them to be occupied. Then I drove back to the house to grab the rest of my things. I packed with urgency, shoving my laptop, cameras, CDs, a portable TV into a duffel bag, even the George Foreman grill. As I yanked the answering machine from the wall, a knock at the door interrupted me. Mr. Lewis? Two uniformed officers stood on the porch. I hesitated. Yeah? Are you Mallory Lewis's husband? A cold sensation crept down my spine. Yes. Is she okay? What's this about? One of them exhaled slowly. Sir, I'm very sorry, but your wife is deceased. The words didn't register. No, that's not possible. I just saw her a couple of hours ago. She was fine. Where did you last see her? The Desk Motel, Penn Avenue. She was with Daniel Whitman. The officers exchanged a glance. Mr. Whitman is deceased as well. The air thickened around me. How? They were shot. I staggered, gripping the doorframe. That's insane. I've been here for hours. I don't even own a gun. Relax, Mr. Lewis. You're not a suspect. The shooter is already in custody. He shifted uncomfortably before continuing. Mrs. Whitman confessed. She ambushed them outside his room, emptied an entire clip, then called 911 herself. When we arrived, she was sitting by the door, crying. Their voices became distant, drowned out by the rushing in my ears. My breath came in uneven gasps. Are you going to be okay? One of them asked. Do you need someone to stay with you? I forced my voice to remain steady. No, I'll be fine. They nodded and left. I turned back to the house, just an empty space now, filled with remnants of a life that had collapsed in an instant. Running a hand over my face, I let out a bitter chuckle. Anyone interested in a Foreman grill? A week ago, everything had been normal. How the hell had it all fallen apart so fast? I had just assumed. My friend, and this is the end of the story. If you liked this story, then put your royal like and subscribe to the channel. May the force be with you. Greetings, my dear viewer. This is a channel about marital infidelity and about the consequences if one spouse starts to cheat on the other. If you, as well as I do, support true family values and condemn cheating, then subscribe to the channel and give this video a like. Let's get started. My name is Buck Garcia, and this is the story of how I fought to safeguard my marriage. While my appearance is ordinary, I pride myself on having an above-average intellect. I work as a porter at a hotel. My wife, Layla, and I are both 26 years old. After finishing high school, I completed a 2-year college program in restaurant management. Layla, my wife, has an undeniable charm. Her appeal isn't rooted in sensuality, but in a sweet, almost childlike innocence that makes her endearingly naive. Layla works as a waitress in the same hotel's restaurant where I'm employed. Her upbeat personality and occasional gullibility often make her a source of good-natured teasing from patrons. She takes it in stride, responding with a laugh and a smile. Even when she realizes she's the butt of a joke, she embraces the humor, which often results in generous tips from customers. Layla never went to college, stopping her education after high school. Despite this, our connection has always been deep and unshakable. We met as teenagers and were immediately drawn to each other. That bond grew stronger with time, and after I finished my studies, we got married. Since then, we've rarely argued and share many interests that keep us close. I would do anything for Layla, and I'm confident she feels the same. Still, I'm aware of my own shortcomings. I have a temper, rare but intense. My childhood was shaped by a father who was an abusive alcoholic. He often lashed out at my mother and me, but the turning point came when he gave my mother a black eye. Seeing her fear and pain that day sparked something inside me, and I decided to act. I was only 14 years old when it happened. That weekend, during a yearly camping trip, my father and I hiked to a remote spot on a mountain. Near our campsite, there was a large rock with a stunning view and a perilous 100-foot drop. No one ever ventured too close to the edge. After dinner, I convinced my father to walk with me to the rock. He was drunk, but followed me. As we stood there, I pretended to set up a photo and asked him to turn toward the view. When he turned his back, I pushed him as hard as I could. He stumbled and fell. There were no witnesses, and I claimed he'd accidentally slipped due to his intoxication. The Rangers' investigation concluded the same. Years later, Layla and I live in a modest apartment near the hotel. She usually cooks dinner for us after her 3 p.m. to 9 p.m. shifts, while I work until 11 p.m. We've been happily married for 5 years and are saving up to one day open our own small restaurant. One morning, our manager, Michael, called us into his office to deliver important news. The hotel had been sold to a new owner, Peter Rossetti. Michael reassured us that there wouldn't be major changes and our jobs were secure. However, he couldn't ignore Rossetti's notorious past, a former mafia boss attempting to go straight. Rossetti planned to employ his non-mafia relatives over time, replacing staff only as they chose to leave. Michael emphasized that no criminal activities would be allowed on the premises. Rossetti quickly made his presence known in the restaurant. He set up a table at the back, positioning his chair to oversee the entire room. At 43, he was a strikingly handsome man with impeccable style. Though married with 2 daughters, he was infamous for his affairs, particularly with married, dark-haired, naive women, a description that fit Layla perfectly. He had a reputation for placating jealous husbands with promises of brief flings and financial incentives. Sometimes other compromises were suggested. Recognizing the potential threat, I warned Layla. "This man is dangerous," I told her. "If he sets his sights on you, he won't stop. Be careful. Avoid his table, keep conversations short, and don't give him any reason to think you're interested." Layla agreed to be cautious. A few days later, Michael informed Layla that Rossetti had specifically requested her to serve his table. She protested, but was told she had no choice. That night, we discussed our options. Layla suggested we resign, and I agreed. The next day, we submitted our 2-week notice, explaining that we couldn't stay under the circumstances. Michael later told us that Rossetti was displeased with our decision. He appreciated our experience and wanted us to remain. He even proposed that one of us stay while the other left, hinting that Layla was the preferred choice. I firmly refused, insisting that we always work together. That evening, one of Rossetti's bodyguards approached me with a message. Rossetti was adamant. I could leave, but Layla would stay. If she refused, he'd ensure we never found work in another restaurant. Cornered, I decided we'd stay and prepare for the worst. I discreetly purchased a .38 caliber pistol with a silencer from a street vendor and instructed Layla to always stop by the front desk if Rossetti ever tried to isolate her. For a while, things seemed calm. Layla maintained a professional demeanor when serving Rossetti, keeping interactions brief and neutral. But one evening during dinner, she shared something that shook me. "Buck, I have to tell you something," she said, her voice unsteady. "2 weeks ago, Michael insisted I deliver dinner to Rossetti's room. I said no, but he told me I didn't have a choice. When I got there, I was terrified. Rossetti noticed and asked why. I told him the truth, that I'd heard about his reputation and was scared to be alone with him. He said he'd never force anyone into anything," she continued. "He asked me to sit and talk for a while. We ended up chatting for about 30 minutes. He was polite and respectful, even giving me a big tip before I left. Since then, I've served him several times, and he hasn't done anything inappropriate. Occasionally, I would sip a small drink while he ate his meal. I stayed nearby until he finished, always making sure he had what he needed. He was consistently courteous, thanking me for my efforts, which left me feeling assured and at ease when I departed his room. After my shifts, Pete would occasionally suggest we grab a drink together. I always declined, explaining that I had to head home to prepare dinner. While our interactions had never crossed any boundaries before, they often left me with an uneasy feeling. Today, however, the dynamic shifted completely. Pete called Layla over and asked her to sit down. He explained that his wife was unwell and that he needed someone to accompany him to social events. He assured Layla that the arrangement would remain entirely platonic and that she wouldn't be asked to do anything she found uncomfortable. To sweeten the offer, he promised to double her salary and provide a generous bonus once the arrangement ended. Layla expressed her gratitude for the opportunity, but said she needed to consult her husband first. Pete's tone became assertive. "Your shift is over. Go home and talk to Buck. If he has any concerns, I'd be happy to speak with him directly," he said. Before Layla could respond, Pete turned to me at my desk and requested a private meeting in his room later that evening. Most people didn't refuse Pete's requests. He assured me the proposal was mutually beneficial. Discreetly, I left through the front door and re-entered through the back to avoid drawing attention. Pete's bodyguard allowed me inside, and I found Pete seated, inviting me to join him. "I have a request to make," he began. "My wife's health is failing, and I need a companion for social functions. I've offered to double your wife's pay if she'll accept the position." I met his gaze steadily. "I love my wife. Pete, you have a reputation as a womanizer. I won't give you the chance to manipulate her." Pete's demeanor hardened. "You won't be able to stop me. Mr. Rossetti, unpleasant consequences await if you try. Do you still want Layla to join me?" "No," I said firmly, rising to my feet. Without hesitation, I pulled my gun and shot Pete in the head. Then I turned and fired at his bodyguard, hitting him squarely between the eyes. Both men died instantly. I arranged their bodies on the bed as though they were embracing and left. On my way home, I discarded the gun and silencer in different sections of the river. When I got home, Layla greeted me with a nervous expression. "What did Pete say?" she asked. "He offered you a job as his companion," I replied. "I told him you're pregnant and that people might gossip if they saw you with him. I suggested he wait until after the baby is born." Layla exhaled in relief. "That's a smart idea." The next morning, Michael called. "It's chaos here," he said. "Pete and his bodyguard were found dead in Pete's room. The police are looking for you, and they're on their way." I quickly informed Layla and advised her to be completely honest with the authorities. "Just recount everything Pete told you," I suggested. 2 detectives arrived and questioned us. Layla shared her conversation with Pete, while my interrogation was far more thorough. I reiterated my story, but added that Pete's last instructions to me had been cryptic. "Call me twice and hang up if anyone comes looking for me. Anyone, even familiar faces." The detectives shifted to personal questions. "Did you ever suspect Pete and Layla of having an affair?" "No," I replied confidently. "Are you certain the baby is yours?" "Without a doubt." They repeatedly questioned the nature of Pete and Layla's relationship. I maintained that it was strictly professional. When asked if anyone had inquired about Pete, I said no. Their final question surprised me. "Do you think Pete and his bodyguard might have been romantically involved?" I laughed. "Impossible. Pete was known for his pursuit of women." The questioning concluded. After the detectives left, Layla peppered me with questions about the previous night. Despite her curiosity, I doubted she suspected my involvement in Pete's death. The following day, we returned to work. Michael informed us that Pete's brother, Tony, had inherited the hotel and restaurant. "Tony's not interested in managing the business," Michael said. "He's leaving it to me, as long as everything runs smoothly." That evening, as I walked home, a car pulled up beside me. A tall, imposing man stepped out and introduced himself. "I'm Tony, Pete's brother. I need a word with you." We shook hands, and I offered my condolences. "Pete was a good man," I said. Tony probed into the events of the night his brother was killed. I repeated the account I'd given the police. He seemed particularly focused on any unusual activity in the lobby and described several people he wanted me to identify. Eventually, the conversation shifted to Pete's interest in Layla. I was concerned, I admitted. Pete's reputation with married women is well known, and my wife is pregnant. I hoped that would discourage him. I kept an eye on things, but wasn't overly worried. Tony's expression darkened. "If Pete had pursued your wife, what would you have done?" "Layla and I would have left immediately," I replied. Tony shook his head. "Pete wasn't forceful. He enjoyed seducing married women, especially naive ones. Once he succeeded, he quickly lost interest. His wife was aware and tolerated it. He always had multiple pursuits." Satisfied with my answers, Tony encouraged us to stay at our jobs and reassured me we'd be safe. Before leaving, he asked if I'd ever noticed anything suggesting Pete or his bodyguard might have been gay. "No," I replied. "Were there any gay men around the hotel that night?" he asked. Not that I noticed, though I've sometimes suspected Michael might be, I admitted. Tony thanked me and left. When I got home, I told Layla about my conversation with Tony and advised her to stay alert for any details that might emerge about Pete's death. Tony was a frequent guest at the hotel, and he consistently sought me out for conversation. Over time, our interactions grew more familiar, and I found myself genuinely enjoying his company. He struck me as an average, unremarkable guy. However, I later learned through whispered rumors that he had assumed Pete's role as the leader of the mafia. We never touched on that part of his life, and I didn't believe Tony's pursuit of Pete's killer was fueled primarily by vengeance. From my perspective, his motivation seemed rooted in survival, as Pete's murder was shrouded in mystery. Occasionally, Tony would invite me out for dinner, where he often waxed lyrical about cooking and the art of crafting dishes. As it happened, I was training to achieve my dream of owning a restaurant one day. One evening, Tony caught me off guard by offering me the position of restaurant manager. The current manager, he explained, was leaving to oversee operations at a renowned diner. Without hesitation or even negotiating my pay, I accepted the opportunity. It felt like my life was finally coming together. Still, a troubling thought lingered in my mind. The possibility of someone else facing punishment for Pete's death. The idea of an innocent person being imprisoned, or worse, for a crime I had committed weighed heavily on me. Eventually, I asked Tony if he had uncovered any new information about Pete's demise. Pete had a talent for making enemies, especially among married couples. It seemed highly probable that someone from his circle had been responsible. I was almost certain the culprit was a man. Based on what I knew, Pete's numerous affairs had enraged several husbands. Two of them, in particular, had both the means and the know-how to carry out such an act. Their anger over Pete's infidelity with their wives made them strong contenders. Furthermore, the manner in which Pete's body was left suggested a display of strength and a desire to humiliate, which made it unlikely that a woman was involved. Whoever was behind Pete's death acted out of pure, unrestrained rage. Their actions seemed calculated to demean him. Despite this, I was confident that none of these suspects posed a direct threat to me. I decided to leave the matter alone unless something new came to light. Layla, meanwhile, carried secrets of her own. She had fabricated a story about suffering a miscarriage when, in truth, she had never been pregnant. About a month later, she confided in me that she suspected I was the one who had killed Pete. She admitted that she had always been afraid of Pete and might have slept with him in an attempt to protect both of us. Her love for me was deep and unwavering, and she would have done anything to keep us safe. Despite her beauty and allure, she never entertained the advances of other men. Layla's loyalty to me remained steadfast, and I was equally resolved to protect her at all costs. If dismantling the entire gang was necessary to ensure our safety, I wouldn't have hesitated. Although I never admitted to her what I had done, I also refrained from outright denying it. Together, Layla and I have created a happy life. She continues to play the part of the sweet, innocent woman, a role that earns her generous tips. We're even making plans to start a family in the coming year. When the baby arrives, Layla plans to stay home, and I intend to continue managing the restaurant until I'm ready to retire. I sincerely hope never to experience the kind of anger that led to Pete's death again. That chapter remains an unsolved mystery, and I'm perfectly fine leaving it that way. My friend, and this is the end of the story. If you liked this story, then put your royal like and subscribe to the channel. May the force be with you.